Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Good morning, George. It's Tuesday, and we're here with another great guest at the Pediatric Lounge.
Yeah, today we have Dr. Alisa Vaughn. She's the Senior Vice President of Operations at Office Practicum, our favorite EHR, and the one that I use in my office. And her topic today is going to be leading a private pediatric practice through change. Not just EHRs, but every day there's a change. Right, Alisa?
Every day there's a change, no matter where we work or what we do. I appreciate the introduction, Dr. Rogu, but you gave me way too much credit in the intro. You called me Dr. Alisa Vaughn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Never.
It just, I'm sorry. Our show is usually about doctors.
Took care of me. Org Kim took care of me. It knocked me out of that running. And I learned very quickly that I was not smart enough to get that degree.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I goofed. I just sometimes go on.
That's okay. Yeah, I do serve as the Senior Vice President of Operations for Office Practicum. But prior to joining OP, I was telling Dr. Bravo, I was a practice administrator for private pediatric practices. And regardless of my time at OP or in the private independent practice space, at the core of my role, I consider myself to be a leader, really an advisor and a supporter of my people. My main responsibilities is really enabling any teams to reach their full potential. So, guiding our operational strategies, advising on best practices, and really providing the necessary support to help people believe in each other, believe in themselves, and really empower that development is such a big part of my job. No matter where I'm going to serve, making sure that my team can learn, grow, and excel, ultimately means that my role is about creating conditions, allowing any operations to run more smoothly and efficiently, while making sure that our teams are feeling empowered and supported.
I guess that takes care of the first question, Herb, right?
So when you say your team, are you talking about internally at OP, or are you talking about your customer too?
Yeah, all people need to feel empowered and supported. And I imagine as we go through the conversation, we're going to tie in whether it's our patients in our practice. They're a part of this, and especially when we talk about change and implementing change in our practices, patient buy-in is really important. And then even at OP, I mean, there are several roles at OP when you're talking about implementing an EHR. That's a pretty difficult change that a lot of practices will go through. But I mean, even despite implementing a new EHR at a practice, which definitely requires some provider champions and change management, flexibility, and education, there are other things that can be some of the most hardest things a practice can go through. I mean, the two of you have probably, like many of our pediatricians across the country, have lived through some of the past years where you've had some of the most significant and impactful change. And I imagine the both of you played big roles in the change in your practices.
So it sounds a lot like you view your role as a coach.
Yeah, a coach. Yeah. So Dr. Skinner and I recently had a conversation, Dr. Katrina Skinner. I know both of you know her very well, but we recently had a conversation about, personal development, where we want to go, what we want to do, how we want to continue to help. And it's ironic, Dr. Bravo, that you say that, because leaning into further education on executive coaching is something that I'm very interested in.
So tell me what would the elevator pitch be for executive coaching?
An elevator pitch for me for executive coaching.
So let me put it another way. Consultants get hammered all the time because they take your money and they run. That's what, if you talk to most doctors, they go, they're going to charge me a lot of money. They're going to put a report on my desk, and then they leave. So what would be the difference between a consultant that, says your KPIs, let's take a practice, X practice, their days in AR 50, their receivable ratio is 77%. And you come in as a consultant, you say you're losing based on what you're generating about $1 million a year with those KPIs, and nothing happens. That's the consultant. The doctor blames the consultant because they don't want to take responsibility of their own.
Yeah.
So what is the difference when you're coaching them and you're meeting with them every week, both in approach and what you can achieve?
Yeah, well, I think what you just said at the end is probably key to that, Dr. Bravo. So I know many, many amazing consultants and have actually served as one myself while I was leading an independently owned pediatric practice. And I think when you're in a consulting role, I think it's bad that consultants get bad PR because there are some out there that do come in, run a quick report, spit the report out at you and say, okay, well, here's your problem and here's what you need to do to fix it. Really, though, the reason why some consultants get bad PR is because they do walk away. Here you go, doctor. And you nailed it at the end. It is that holistic approach, the continual follow-up, the continuous communication, and the continual guidance. So to me, if a consultant came into your practice, what I would be most interested in is, so what are you going to do once you give me the information? I've always said, and Dr. Cressley and I talked about this on a podcast we did together, the physician and administrator relationship is so important because I can't do what you can do, Dr. Bravo and Dr. Rogu. I cannot treat the patient. I cannot diagnose the patient. I cannot generate those charges that are going to bring in ultimate revenue to make sure that I can run payroll properly. What I can do for you as a consultant is come in and tell you where your gaps are, where there are areas of improvements that you need to make. But really, the most important part of this, and this is what we're talking about, change. Change is very difficult for people, as many of you know, and enacting on change in your practice, you're going to be met with a lot of resistance, especially when you're talking about KPIs and financials. Your billers are automatically going to go into fear mode, right? I've been exposed. They've lost control. So as a consultant, it's important to me, and this is the approach that I have always taken. Dr. Bravo, you hired me to come into your practice and assess the situation, tell you where there may be gaps and identifications, but where I'm going to be most powerful is not sitting in your office speaking to you. Where I'm going to be most impactful is sitting with your people and making sure that they understand that this is not about someone doing something wrong. It's not about doing anything wrong, and this shouldn't be about fear, but this is about us really joining together and making sure that you understand.
So let me back up for a second. Yeah. So I what I'm trying to get at is when you take the approach that you take, which is to coach people up, as opposed to continuously bring them down with little singers, which doesn't achieve anything.
No.
How do you get that very smart physician that's leaving $1 million on the table, and you know that response, the data is wrong. We can't change it. I'm making enough money. How many times have you heard that as the excuses? So as a change specialist, how do you get a very smart physician who is leading his or her group, once you educate them on what the metrics are, to start that change? Until the leader wants to change, nobody in the organization will change. So what's this next step as a coach? And what's the value of meeting once a week together and working on this? Because first we got to work on the leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're so right. So when we're talking about change and kind of the pattern of change, and you're introducing that foreign element, especially to a provider who may be resistant, whether it's successful or not. And there have been some, Dr. Bravo, I'm sure you've encountered pediatricians in your own sphere that you try to encourage and support that just don't want to change.
Oh, that's right.
And, there are some times where you can try your best. Patience and persistence is always key, but we know, coaching a physician to say change rarely happens overnight is one thing. But I think what you're getting at is how do we even open their eyes to there is a change that needs to be made, and I need you to get engaged to do that. Whether right or wrong, if a consultant comes into your practice and tells you you're leaving $1 million on the table and your eyebrows don't raise and you're not ready to say, oh my gosh, what's going on? I don't know that anything I say to you, Dr. Bravo, is going to help you change.
What I found with consultants is they'll come in, they'll evaluate the practice and tell you things. But most of the time, the doctor already knows these problems.
No, it's not true.
Oh, yes, it is. They already know they left
$1
million on the table. They already know that they have a problem with that office manager. They already know they have a problem with that partner. The problem is, how do you take that and fix it?
Okay, so we got two different conversations going. Okay, there are a lot. Okay, here's one that really bothers me. I am going to hire Sue Crossley to help me negotiate my contracts with Blue Cross Blue Shield, when Blue Cross Blue Shield has 60 to 70% of my patient base. You got no leverage. In the meantime, I don't have the leadership skills to ask my front desk staff to collect the copays and the deductibles of every patient that comes in for a sick visit. I don't have the process or the IT to know what the patient's going to owe me when they come in or when they're leaving. And so then I have to do a lot of work to collect from the patients. And then I'm billing for a bunch of 99212s. But I'm going to focus on going with Dr. Crossley to Blue Cross Blue Shield to get a 3% increase. Bananas.
Yeah.
Bananas. That's like I'm putting the best rims in my car possible. They're going to cost me $12,000. The car's worth $6,000, but I'm not going to put gas in it.
You got to go for a low-lying fruit, as Chip says.
Mm-hmm.
Bananas.
Things you can resolve.
Now, the consultant is, like anyone else, is a business person. You're hiring me to tell you whether your kid has an ear infection or not. They don't. Whatever marital problem you and your wife have, that is not my area of expertise. Go see a psychologist. We're done. You paid me to diagnose the ear infection. You didn't pay me to solve your marriage. So there are practices that don't have the leadership skills and they have a culture problem, whether it's a manager or a department, and they'll hire the consultants to buttress up the fact that they have a problem. But they weren't willing to solve the problem before the consultant. Even with the report, they're still not willing to solve the problem, but now they got someone to blame.
Yeah.
And so is that the consultant's fault? No, that's lack of, courage on the leadership of the practice. That's all it is.
Yeah, you're right.
And the problem, and this is why I take very few consulting clients. Problem is that when you walk in and you see a disaster of a billing system, system, I mean, the whole thing, the employees, the IT, the process. When you're an outsider, you walk in, the moment you walk in, people start quitting. Because they know they're not going to get away with what they were getting away for the last 10 years, and they're not willing to change. And usually the practice owner, his or her hair gets set on fire. The first employee that quits, they want nothing more. Stop. Don't do anything else. So change management is extremely difficult. But again, I think we have it wrong. And no offense, there's great people doing this all over the country. But let's be honest. When you hire Chip Hart, you're not hiring him to give you an hour of his time every week to coach you up. You're not paying him for that. You're paying for him to analyze what's wrong with your practice and give you best practices that other people have done that works. And if you want him to come back next year, then you pay him for that time. And that's not on Chip, that's on you. That's why I think the coaching is so much more powerful, because you develop the relationships. And if you, like you are, a people person and are willing to slowly motivate people to be the best self they can be without putting them down. It's easy to put somebody down. It's simple to say, oh, I guess. That stuff is so easy.
Well, you're both right on so many levels. So I'll tell you, in my own experience, Dr. Rogu, the last practice that I managed, I came in like a consultant, right? I did my initial assessment in the first 9 days, ran all the reports, pivoted everything, running my KPIs, just kind of assessing the situation. And many people have heard my story. On the 9th day after I'd done my assessment, looking at the P&L, pulling things out of the EHR, served with a malpractice suit, 2 meaningful use audits, right? I can't make this stuff up.
Wow.
And so I sat down with my physician owner and my lead physician, and I was kind of joking a little bit. And I said, well, boy, I didn't ask the right interview questions before I took this job. But Doc, I need to tell you, we, and that's important, are in serious trouble here. And there's a way out. But honestly, I am shocked that your line of credit is not extended and that your lights are still turned on. And he said to me, Dr. Rogu, kind of what you were saying is, I knew that there was something wrong. Like he was brilliant, intelligent, and a great businessman, actually. But his focus was not on that. His focus was on his patients. And whether right or wrong, his approach was, I know something's wrong, but I'm going to ignore it. He literally said to me, I ignored it because I hope if I did, it would go away, right? It would solve itself. It's almost like a suspicious mole on your face. I'm going to ignore this. I know what's going on, but hopefully if I ignore it, it'll go away, is really important. And, so I do think that there are physicians that know they need to change, but sometimes it's easier to turn a blind eye to it because it distracts you. Running the business of pediatrics can be very distracting from patient care. And honestly, that's not why either of you, I'm going to assume, became pediatricians. You didn't become pediatricians because you wanted to be great businessmen. You wanted to be great doctors and great caregivers. And so anything that distracts you from that immediately becomes very difficult to deal with, especially when we're not trained or you're not trained in medical school most times on how to run a business. I mean, Dr. Suzanne Berman talks about this all the time, and it's something she's really passionate about. But I think what's most important, you were talking about Chip coming in and analyzing data, and this is where I'm saying we are missing the mark, Dr. Bravo. We are doing some things wrong. Coming in and telling you, Dr. Bravo, here's your report, you have a problem, go fix it. That is not a solution. Because if you don't get your guiding coalition involved and you don't prepare your people and involve stakeholders, diverse stakeholders, right, at every education level, every function of role in your organization into the conversation of why we need to change, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. You also mentioned a really good point. As soon as a consultant comes in the door, people are quitting, right? Like, oh my God, I'm about to be exposed.
Yep.
We've also missed an opportunity there. If you have Polly or Chip or myself or Nancy Babbitt or Sue Cressley, I mean, there's so many great consultants out there, show up at your practice unannounced, and you as the leader, you set the tone, you're the owner, lead physician, managing partner, whatever your role is in the organization, you are not preparing your people for this change and giving and communicating to them like, hey guys, we're always seeking quality improvement. I want to take a look at this because your 401ks are important to me, right? Making sure that we're able to remodel our practice, create a great experience, get out in the community, whatever the why is behind that, explaining why you're bringing in a consultant and how it's going to benefit them, not put their jobs in jeopardy, but benefit them, I think is a great way to start. And when you said something at the end, Dr. Bravo, but it made me think, I don't remember what it is now, but it made me think about buying into the chaos. So people start, quitting, quiet quitting, even we've heard that term a lot. Quiet quitting the moment that they lose control, or there's the fear of the unknown. What is Dr. Bravo and Alisa talking about in his office? Like, what did Alisa find in the practice? We can't buy into chaos, because that leads to further resistance to change. And you had mentioned, what do we do about the provider that's not willing to change? But for the providers that are willing to change, the most important is that you model positivity throughout it, that you demonstrate to your team members that change is possible and evolution is growth. And we're all going to come out on, at the end of this journey together, more evolved and better for it. I think a lot of times I remember back to my practice days, and I even still use this tactic today. And I know that this is a situation that you two probably deal with quite often. Your best medical assistant, you know who she is, he is your best medical assistant on the floor that you just cannot imagine going through your day without, comes to you and says, oh my God, look at your schedule. We just got 2 more patients added to our schedule at the end of the day. Right? What would your reaction be to that? Maybe very different than what it should be. It should be, yes, we just got 2 more patients added to the schedule. Continue. And then your MA says something like, well, the front desk doesn't care. They don't care about us. They don't care whether we go home on time. They didn't follow protocol. Maybe they didn't collect the copay. I don't know if your MA is that keen on that, but they didn't follow protocol. They didn't triage. They just booked the appointment. To which your response should be very crisp and tight. Okay, so we just recently got some new information. Continue, right? Let them continue. But don't you understand, Dr. Rogu? Don't you understand? They double booked you at 5 p.m. They're horrible. They don't care about us or our families, or if you make your kid's soccer game. This is a total disaster, right? You can't buy into this chaos. What you should do is say, awesome. Okay, I get it. I understand. So tell me what you did to help. What did you do to help the situation?
Or how can we get them in and out quickly so we can?
Or how can we get, what are your ideas to get them in and out quickly?
Yeah.
And when you talk about enacting change in your office, sometimes managing the resistors, and I'm not talking about the physicians, because that's a different story to your
okay,
point,
so
Dr.
what is
Bravo.
so before you go there, because I love that word, but before you go there, you still have not answered my question.
Oh, okay.
Okay. What is the value of coaching versus being in a room being lectured to as an adult with 400 other people that are interested in that subject matter? What is the value proposition of coaching versus a lecture with 400 pediatricians in your mind? Why? I mean, if you didn't think there was value, you wouldn't be talking about it. So what is the value proposition?
You're asking me such a tough question, because this is something I'm just starting to really dabble in. I do this naturally, but forming words to put an elevator pitch to this is something I haven't written down, and I haven't really thought through.
I think he's trying to get at you're creating relationships with somebody that wants to see you succeed and helps you to succeed. Is that where you're going?
Well,
I'm just trying to get at what she's doing, right? So change is extremely difficult for anyone, whether it's losing weight, exercising, drinking less, not speeding, whatever it is that you need to change in your life, being nicer to your kids or your spouse, being a better leader, whatever. I just think as adults, we no longer learn from sitting in a classroom anymore. We learn from talking to each other, and we learn as we build relationships and trust. And the great advantage of a coaching group is, or a mastermind group, is that you can get people with different perspectives that slowly, I'm going to use the word assuade your fear of change and get you to where you actually change your habits, as opposed to the consultant or the big lecture where you hear it and you're like, they're right, but I just don't know how to even start to change.
Yes, so I think
I
I'm
think that's the
indirectly
value.
answering your question through our
Yes, I think
dialogue,
that's the value of the coaching is that I think that, you take one step at a time. So when the consultant, and I have nothing against consultants, I think they do a great job.
Mhm.
Or big events. They're fun. You get to see your friends. But what I'm saying is change is difficult. If you want to run a marathon and you're not a runner, you got to start by taking a couple of steps. And we have it backwards in adult education. We'll say a marathon is 20 some miles. Here's a training program, and I give it to you, versus, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's walk a block today together, and let's talk about what you need to do next.
Yeah.
I think that's coaching. All right, now you can walk 2 miles without pain. Maybe we can jog the 2 miles. Because change is very difficult, and if you don't break it down to little pieces, it's impossible. So what is a resistor? I like that word that you used.
Yeah, your resistors. So we have these in every business, whether it's a practice or at OP. Your resistors are someone that you mentioned, Dr. Bravo, that just are not willing to change. Your resistors are inevitably people you need to identify out of the gate before you enact on change. Because you already know who your resistors are in the office. More times than not, you know who they are, or any business that you're in. When you're managing resistors, what I feel like is important is knowing who they are out of the gate and understanding why they're resistant. And we're coming back to kind of the same things. More times than not, you've mentioned change is hard, and it is hard because we're asking people to change their routines. We're creatures of habit, right? The second that you tell me to push a button somewhere else or to walk in a different direction to go weigh a patient, right? That's change, and you're interrupting my day, and I don't like it. I'm going to make sure you know about it. One of the strategies that I've used more often than not when I'm managing resistance in my practice is just like knowing who's going to bellyache the most, right? When you want to make a change in your office or in your business, it's equally as important to identify your influencers. Who are those people when you're not around that are going to help you model positivity? Who are those people that are going to say, well, wait a minute, right? That's not how we want to think about this. Remember, Dr. Bravo told us when we had a consultant come in that the reason why we're doing this is because he'd really love to contribute more to our 401ks. And if there is a way that we can all get more efficient, do this together, right, we're all going to benefit in the end. So identifying those influencers who are willing to kind of speak up and not lecture, to your point, to say, well, no, that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is looking at how we can all be better, is really important through this process. You had mentioned.
And so let me ask you, so there are people that are resistors, that's just their nature. Whatever you tell them, their answer is no. My father's one of those.
Yeah.
You got to tell him 3 times until he finally listens to you. And then there's incompetent people. And I'll give you an example. I was helping an ophthalmology practice change their RCM. And it was all a cloud-based RCM. and you had to log in into your email account from your desktop computer to get the security credentials to log in for the first time. And the checkout lady, who's my age, I said, you need to log into your email account, but not your phone email account, your actual email account. She went to Google on the search bar, typed in her email account, and then said to me, it doesn't work.
And user error.
And, so I went back to the business owner. I said, let's say, her Susie Q is not going to be part of this organization for long, because she don't even know how to log into her own email account. How is she going to be able to do anything in a cloud-based software? And he said, well, do you want me to fire her now? I said, no, she's going to quit. She's going to storm out because she's going to be frustrated. Well, you just have to start looking for a replacement now. So what do you do with someone that's not just a resistor, but is incompetent?
Well, I think the question I would ask you is, would we make complete judgment based on that one end user error, as you said, Dr. Rogu? I would not. And the reason I wouldn't is because you're mentioning a cloud-based software. That's a foreign element. And a lot of times when anything new is happening, just like today, you asking me about the coaching prop, right? I haven't thought that through. Having the time and the space on my own to process and come back to you with that question is really important. When you're changing on the fly, there's this nervous energy, right, that comes out of that, because you know you're being expected to know something that you may not be familiar with. So for me, I think it's important to say, hey, you've got a few folks on your team that this is a truly new concept. This is a foreign element. We're going to keep working with them. We're going to give them the training and the resources they need, right, to help them succeed. I'm not going to make an automatic judgment of someone because they, copy and pasted something into the wrong browser or click the wrong button out of the gate. I'm going to be more empathetic and say, okay, I understand that this is change. Change is hard. There's some fear here. There's the fear of the unknown. I'm not an expert anymore because I don't know what buttons to push when. And I've got Dr. Bravo looking at me, and I really want to be able to nail this. And I mean, I do this all the time. If somebody's looking over my shoulder while I'm asking, or sometimes I can fake it till I make it, right? And I can answer a question on the fly, but then there are other times where I'm going to say, oh, I need to really think this one through a little bit. And it's okay to allow people the space to learn and grow. When you have provided all of the necessary training and resources, and you realize at some point, I don't know what point in time that is, that this is true like incompetence, then yeah, I mean, we need to free some futures in our practice.
Free some futures. I like.
Yeah. So Dr. Bravo, this cloud thing, how did you expect that person to know where to log in if you didn't give her a link, a desktop shortcut, a hyperlink on a website or something? I mean, I go through this with you all the time. Just today, where did you put the show notes for Alicia's show?
Well, you're one of the most disorganized persons I know, George.
Oh my God.
But it's really difficult to keep
I made a Google Drive where you have working episodes on deck, blah, blah, blah.
This was a very simple process that happens every day. You get an email from, the new vendor that says, Dear Herb, click on the link below to verify your credentials to log in for the first time.
Right.
You can't do it from your cell phone because the softwares require a desktop.
Yeah.
It could be a Mac, a Windows, a Linux machine. So you have to go and log in to your email server, whatever that is. You can't do it from the phone where it's already there. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And she wasn't able to log into her own email account.
Yeah, that's a concept sometimes that's a little difficult for some people.
And then, I love I love doing this to practices. I like to call people through their main office line and see how poorly I get treated. I don't have to because I got George's cell phone, but I get a kick out of it because, they'll put me on hold for 15 minutes and I hang up and I'll call again. They put me on hold again. And then I just give up, hang up the phone and call you in the cell and say, you know what? I just spent 20 minutes on the phone trying to get through your front desk to get to you. And I'm a doctor. I wonder what it's like when you're a patient to schedule an appointment in your office, because they just automatically put you on hold and leave you there in Death Valley.
Death Valley.
Yep. But I
Right?
think, Dr. Bravo, in all due respect, because I hold you in very high regard, I think that when we know I gotcha, right? I already expected you to fail me, and you did. And so now I'm going to lecture you, right? That's what we were
Yeah.
talking about. I'm going to lecture you on how dare you. I am a doctor. I waited on the phone 20 minutes, and you're automatically going into what's wrong with you. This is incompetent. Your processes are broken. When we know this happens, especially in small independent practices where there may be 2 front desk people, 2 MAs, 1 provider, and a nurse practitioner, and that baby comes in with blue lips.
Yeah.
Chaos breaks out, protocol is broken, process no longer matters because you're shifting your gears into managing that patient and supporting your provider. So what if you were on hold, Dr. Bravo, for 20 minutes because you were making sure that baby was stable and your front desk was on the phone with 911, right? Maybe they were the only person in the practice that was able to do that. So the phone lines ringing at that point in time wasn't what matters. I think we fail to forget that we're human and we've got to approach situations with empathy and understand what's causing the problem. And this is what we were talking about a minute ago before we jump into the lectures. It may be a lack of training or resources a lot of time, especially today. I think what I learned more than anything coming out of our last user conference, we were having this kind of roundtable about some of the challenges that our practices are universally facing, and it's finding talent, finding people that are
Yes.
even willing to come in. So what if you had 5 front desk and 4 of them did quit because they could go down the road and work at Panera Bread and make just as much money?
True. But I'm going to push back against you. So I think that, yes, if it's a one time that it happens, but since I'm consulting for this practice and I always call through the same number to see what it's like to try to get through that number, and every time I get put on hold and I have to wait 10 minutes, then I know it's not a one event. So
Yeah.
there is a problem. And that's an important, somebody that's got a sick kid with 103 fever shouldn't be put on hold for 10 minutes and there are no blue kids coming in every day into my practice.
Yeah.
That's a once in a year event. Then, the
Yeah.
sky may fall, the lights may turn out today, the hurricane might have wiped out my office, there might have been a fire yesterday. Yeah, those are 1 in 100-year events. So if consistently you're providing poor customer service,
Yeah.
there's a problem with your culture.
Or your process. It might not be your
process
people.
is part of culture. You may not be hiring the right people. You may not be giving them the right tools. You may not be giving them the right expectations. You may not be giving them training because I need another warm body. Anybody will do.
Yeah.
And it's hurting your team.
You're right.
So yeah, we have to be empathetic and train people and teach them and coach them up to be able to do the right thing. But if there comes a point where they are not capable or unwilling to do, then, well, we got to find someone, because if there's no money coming into the practice, I can't do my job.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people this all the time: before you hire a front desk person, first question to ask him or her is, are you comfortable asking for money? Because there's people that are not.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not willing to ask for the copay and the deductible when that patient comes in, you're going to run me out of business.
Yeah.
You know, a biller in today's environment, if he or she, and it's mostly she's, I don't know why, but it's mostly she's, says, you know, auto posting from your, you know, RCM solution is dangerous. I got to do it by hand. It's time to find a retirement place. You cannot manage anymore doing that by hand.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Just
But
the
if they're still,
productivity alone.
but if they're doing it that way, what are you going to do? They've done it for 10 years. You got to find someone new. It's really hard to change somebody that's been doing something for 10 years and tells you flat out, auto posting is dangerous. Yeah, it was dangerous 10 years ago. It didn't really work very well. But today is the only way to do business.
How often do you come across, Dr. Bravo? I come across this quite a bit, and I'd love any insight either of you have into this, but how often do you come across physicians or practices that aren't willing to invest the time and resources into training because they think it takes too long or it's too expensive? And I really struggle with this because I see it as counterproductive, because ultimately in the end, right, the first question you need to ask is, can you ask for a copay? And that's a part of it, a huge part of it. But if we're not investing in the training all the way around on the why this is important, why you need to do it, which you had mentioned, I just find it's counterproductive because it lowers our productivity, it increases errors. You're going to have burnout, high turnover rate because someone is feeling like they're never going to please you or succeed. We get poor patient care, bad experiences. And in your billing office, right, or even in your back office, I mean, you know, without proper training, we think about patient privacy and other things, and that can get us into kind of legal and regulatory compliance, challenging situations. What would you say to a physician who's just not willing to invest in time, tools, or resources for their people to help support them?
I would say what Chip Hart would tell me: pray he doesn't kill a kid before he goes out of business. Because when someone gets to that level of denial, they're burned out and they're not providing good care. And they really need to be out of business. Unfortunately, but that is the truth. They need to be out of business because they just don't care. And they're in a downward spiral of where they have poor leadership, a culture that's sick, and no bench strength. So if you're a small office and you have an MA and a front desk person, that's your entire staff, the front desk person quits, you got to put another person in there right away to keep seeing patients. Where does the time come to train them from? I mean, that's just a really difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, who's going to check in the patients while they train them? And so that, you know, for that kind of practice is extremely difficult. For other practices, is they just lack leadership.
Mm-hmm.
They lack leadership, and you can show them over and over again. You know, you know, and you probably know when there's poor leadership just by asking a couple of questions. So that ophthalmology practice makes 1.5 million, and the surgeon takes home $1 million. Okay, and he had outsourced his billing to the same people that had done the billing for his father's GI company. And these ladies were in their 50s. They had started doing billing when there was no computers. They were using Tiger Mist, which is absolutely a terrible system. They weren't able to give the practice scheduler a real time of like, this patient owes this much, that patient owes that much. They never verified insurances until after they got it. They violated HIPAA because they would pick up the chart sheets and then take them to the basement of the house of the owner of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I said to him, look, your days in our AR are crazy. Your net receivable ratio is nuts. You can't be, you have to have access to the billing system in your office in real time and real time insurance. To know that that patient has insurance when you see him. I mean, it was a disaster. He had done both eyes on people. Neither one had been ever paid. And the billers didn't know about it. When you told them, we need to get the days in AR down to under 20, they about cut my head off. They didn't know what it was. They weren't willing to learn what it was. They were like, we have done this. You're not a biller. You're a doctor. We know what we're doing. This is the way it's always been done. And it's like, that's not the way it's always been done. It was the way it was done in the 80s. But we're in the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back in the 80s, what they used to do was they'd send out bills, 10 bills, 9 of them will probably be paid. One of them didn't get paid, but it didn't matter because the other 9 were paid. And it was major medical. So whatever they charged, they got back. So they got stuck in that
and
cycle.
it was all handwritten, everything was handwritten.
Yeah.
You filled out the form. So there are people in our industry that are absolutely a disaster. And it takes all about an hour to figure it out. But boy, when you try to change them, you better wear your bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
Do you know what I find though? I think billing is a really good example of this. And this may be why they're resistant. Like, who are you, Dr. Bravo? What do you think you know, right? Because you're coming in and there is some level of vulnerability that they're experiencing. And what I find a lot of times is that we have billers in our offices that know where to click a button and when to click a button. But the education behind true revenue cycle management and how you get AR down to 20 days, like what are the strategies, that a lot of times is missing. And you're right, if you come in and you're like, okay, we got to get it down to 20 and here's how we're going to do it, like, you're out of your mind, Dr. Bravo. That's not what we need to do. And I think at some point, if you are providing the how and the why and you're still just not getting any change or any results, that's when you might have to freeze some futures, as we said.
Yeah, this story is so pathetic. You know what? They sent out patient bills 3 times a year.
Wow.
By hand.
Yeah.
And
It
they would put the stamp on each one. And ophthalmology sees more patients than pediatrics. They see 40 to 60 patients every day.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And it's like, are you out of your mind?
And they've always done it like that before, Herb. They're just continuing.
I understand, George, but when someone says, hey, Herb, nobody uses bicillin shots for strep anymore. Everybody uses amoxicillin now. It's less expensive and it doesn't hurt. I go, well, no, I've always done it that way. I'm not going to change.
That's, unfortunately, they've always done it that way, and the culture continues. And the person that continues that culture, if it's always been that way, was the lead physician. So unless he changes, nobody will change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the boss man.
It's leadership. And I think when we talk about leadership, leadership is certainly not for the faint of heart.
No.
It's hard.
It's very hard. And it is about taking a more human-centric approach. It's not for the faint of heart. It's also not for people who are crave comfort, not willing to grow, those that prioritize their ego above their team's needs or people's needs.
Would you say that again?
Yeah.
That's important. Yeah.
Okay.
Right there. That's your
Okay.
answer.
So when we're talking about leadership, it's not for those who crave comfort over growth. It's not about prioritizing your ego over the needs of others, especially your team who is surrounding you to make sure that your mission is achieved. It's definitely not for those who shy away from making difficult decisions. It's also not, leadership is not, you have to have a lot of humility in leadership, because it's not for those who avoid feedback or resist change, Dr. Bravo. And we were talking about physicians at the very beginning of this. And many times, if I can't get you as a physician to be the champion, we all look up to you in our practices. We're looking to you for how we're going to react and behave. And so ultimately, leadership is not for the self-serving.
No.
It's really for those who are committed to serving others. And as I say this out loud, Dr. Bravo, I'm thinking in my head, you were asking for kind of an elevator pitch on coaching. So see, I needed time to process during this call. When we're talking about leadership and what the difference is between kind of coaching and lecturing, coaching is really dynamic, right? It's an interactive process. It's where we're really guiding individuals to their ultimate success. It's really going to focus on empowering and unlocking potential by asking the right questions. You've talked about this throughout this podcast. Like, the questions you're going to ask to get where you need to get. I think lecturing, on the other hand, is a very one-way delivery of information. Typically, it comes from a consultant or an expert, right? But it usually comes from presentations or speeches and not open dialogue, where we have the diverse group of people sitting at our table. So really, to me, coaching is facilitating on personal growth. So coaching is different than consulting.
So very, very much so. So I got a couple of questions for you. So first is, do you think that you can coach someone to be a leader?
Oh, I have been asked this question before, and I actually have talked to a lot of HR representatives, experts in the fields about this. I think that there are certain personality traits that come with a natural born leader. I do think that you can educate people in developing leadership skills. People actually get degrees in this. But if you don't have fire in the belly and you really don't have the passion for people, and you're in leadership, you're willing to go and get a master's in organizational leadership and communication, but then you have your fancy title and you're in it to be self-serving, your people are going to figure you out real fast.
Yep.
So I think it's a yes and no question. I think, yes, you can give people the tools, the resource, the education they need to be better leaders. But I do think that there are certain personality traits that come with some of the best leaders.
I think with leadership, if you have somebody that's a good leader, and then there's the team, and you're a good leader, I think they try to emulate that and follow what you do, and eventually one day become that leader. So that's, I guess, it is teachable, but it's like, I guess, teaching by assimilation. They have to watch it and grow into it.
Yeah.
It's not taught with the course.
But not everybody wants to be a leader. There's some people that, want to be, the soldier.
Yeah,
and they're very
soldiers
happy.
are good too.
They're very good.
Soldiers are very important.
Yes, they're very good at what they do.
They have to execute the leader's commands.
And that's all they want. And that's fine.
That's fine as long as they execute.
Yes. To your point about the dynamic of coaching versus lectures. For example, it doesn't matter who you talk to. The best practice is to keep a credit card on file to bill for those high deductible plans. So I could get up in a lecture and say, if you do that, your net receivable ratio will jump right away. That easy one. However, That's not really the truth, right? So Susan Zerata doesn't like that term. So they try to achieve 100% of, they call it autopay. Kathleen Wania doesn't feel comfortable doing that. So what she does is she calculates the deductible for a 99213. They collect that, and then they collect the rest later. Totally acceptable. Kristen in Arizona, at the checkout date, at the checkout counter, they actually calculate what you owe and collect it all before the patient leaves. And Brandon in Chicago won't accept you into his practice unless you put the credit card down. And they all work. But you wouldn't know that if you don't talk to them. And that's your point. When you get in a room of people, and I'm not comfortable keeping the credit card on file, somebody will say that. Well, then here's some other options. And they all work. But do something, for God's sake.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of coaching. You like a book, right? Leading Change.
Yeah. Are you talking about John Kotter's book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me why you like it and what's the premise of that book.
Yeah. So the reason why I like Leading Change is because many times when we're thinking about any operational aspect of a business, we tend to be linear thinkers. A lot of times, like, what is step A, what is step B, so on and so forth. So in John Kotter's book, he really breaks this down into an 8-step process that is very practical, and kind of gives you real world scenarios about each of these 8 steps. So anybody that is interested, it's an old book, but it's an oldie but a goodie. It's just one of the many books that I think people can put in their arsenal just to kind of help them, think through change. But I'll tell you, one of the things that to your point about open dialogue and the way we learn today as adult learners, I do think the conversations like this, and many others are really the most important. So, we can read books. Academia is certainly a part of this, but learning from others is so important. And I was recently at a conference, and Dr. Vincent Iannelli, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Iannelli or not, but he was speaking, and he said something that I thought, oh my goodness, I have not read this in any book when I'm talking about change. And he just nailed it down. Maybe he should write a book. But he was saying that, in medical school, physicians learn that the key factors to being a good healthcare provider are following 3 A's. And it was availability, affability, and ability. And what he said was, and he went through all 3 of those, but he said he found all of that to be great advice. But adding the 3rd component to that, a 4th A, was adaptability, right? The ability to be able to adjust as conditions change. That's how you're going to be successful when you need to enact change in the office. So I love John Kotter's book, but again, just through open dialogue and listening to him, that was something that I remembered. And I thought, oh my gosh, we could really expound upon the 4 A's, not the 3 A's.
Yes. Yeah. And to your point, right? So when you're at PMI and the audience is out there, the lights are so bright on you, you can barely see the facial expressions of the people in the room to see if, you're connecting with them or not. And it's nothing against the conference. It's just, in order to put the cameras on so everybody can see you, there has to be a certain amount of light on your face, and it makes it very difficult to connect with people that way. But it's somehow you got to get at least the basic information out to people, right?
Yeah.
But I think the conversations are so much more meaningful.
So much more meaningful.
And I think that's why so many industries are moving away from these big conferences, and they're going to coaching. to create a group of like-minded people, maybe different different levels in development and different skill sets,
Yeah.
but that they all have a common, they want to run their practices with high quality and not be out of business.
Yeah, you are spot on, Dr. Bravo. And one of the things that we've learned, there are a ton of really great conferences out there in the industry. PMI was always my favorite. I loved going to PMI, and I actually tell young practice administrators, like, before you go out and invest a ton of dollars in MGMA and you get lost in the national universe of MGMA, if you're committed to pediatrics, start with PMI, because you're going to get really practical, good information and the ability to have conversations. One of our most popular, it was our most popular this year, and will be a big part of our conference next year, is what we call solution rooms. And it is not a lecturer sitting on the stage talking to you about theoretical best practices, speaking at you, but it is literally a room of 4 tables, 8 people of all different backgrounds, functions, role, right? That diversity that we talked about.
Yes.
At a table in the room, all trying to solve the same problem. And so we go through this exercise where each table is talking together. They're all sharing their ideas. And at the end, each table shares what the solution they've come up with to the challenge, the collective challenge we're all trying to solve. And
Right.
it has been some of the most powerful sessions we have ever had, because you have all of us who are honestly in this for the same thing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I know people love to talk about business, the business of pediatrics. I cannot deny that that is truly important, but we forget about why we're really all here. And we're really all here because we care about our future and the children that we're privileged to serve. Regardless of what angle you're coming from, whether you work in an EHR company, you're a practice administrator, you're a physician, you're a medical assistant, you're a biller, right? More times than not, you're in peds, especially if you've been in it for a really long time, because you truly care about human beings and the development of people. And just seeing the power of those solution rooms, the conversation, the open dialogue, it's pretty powerful. I really like that concept, Dr. Bravo.
I agree. And I think that's that's where we need to move to.
Yeah.
More of that, and more coaching groups. We've had tremendous success with our own coaching group, and it's not really George or I, it's just the people in it. They're smart, they're young, they're driven, they want to do good. And, then it's all about teaching them what to measure, and then finding a way that they can, achieve that goal. Everybody has a different comfort level.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But, you can, and so the other thing, and the other dynamic is that when you're not the one, you don't have skin in the game, in the sense you're not losing or making money on the transaction. You are much more objective, and you can look at different stuff and say, like, hey, this is easy money you're leaving on the table. It just takes adjusting one charge, and you're gonna make a little more money. And that's very powerful, because you're just looking at it from a different angle than the person running the practice is. What else would you like to share with the audience? Because I know we're getting short on time.
Yeah, I think this, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's been a really great conversation. I've enjoyed speaking to the both of you, and I'm actually going to walk away with a couple of things that I need to think about myself as I continue to nurture and develop my own, so I can continue to nurture and develop others. I think we've talked about this a little bit, but I think the biggest takeaways that I would have for anybody enacting change or trying to enact change is patience and persistence are key. So this rarely happens overnight. Like we had talked about before, we're altering established habits and routine ways of thinking, which all take time. And so patience demonstrates that respect that we've talked about with, several situations throughout this conversation for individual learning, and the emotional processes that people have been going through. And then the persistence, right? To be a good leader, you have to be committed to this change. You have to be willing to dive into the uncomfortable zones, despite the obstacles that you're going to face. And it doesn't mean, when we talk about Dr. Iannelli and the adaptability, persistence doesn't mean that you stubbornly stick to the predetermined plan. It does mean that we need to be agile. We need to be able to adapt and be flexible to achieve our overarching goal. And then at the end of the day, because I am a people person, at the heart of it all, a human-centric approach is always best, right? If we're going to foster a more supportive and cohesive team, we all have to be reminded constantly and constantly communicate and lift one another up that we're all a part of our shared endeavor. And it's a reminder that ultimately change is not just about what we do differently, but about who we become at the end of the process.
Yeah, that's beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. People don't realize that just even a little negativity, really destroys that team effort.
It sure does.
And it takes a lot of, I'm not good at it because I cuss like a sailor. I do. But
That means you're honest, Dr. Bravo. You're not hiding anything.
Sometimes there's something my dad said to me once, he says, it's okay to be honest, son, but you don't have to be brutally honest.
Yeah. So let me leave you guys with the signature on my email that says, the most dangerous phrase in the medical practice language is, we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
That's very, very terrible. I remember while we were doing change in our office, I'd go to the senior doctors and say, well, we don't have to do that. We've always done it like this. So why change?
Yeah.
I automatically wanted to change for that very reason. Didn't know what I was doing, but it was the right answer.
I might steal that signature line, Dr. Roku. That's great.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing what OP.
Thank you, Dr.
Supporting the independent pediatric offices. It's very important work that you do.
Yeah.
And
I can't walk away from peds. I just can't.
Great. We'd love to hear that.
Thank you both so much. It's been a true honor and pleasure.
Likewise. Hope to see you again soon.
All right. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge. On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.